Today, we're going to talk about two big pandemic concerns, pivots and security. And we have a company that's taking care of both, Sysdig. So stay tuned. Hey everybody, welcome back to another Future Tech video podcast. The audio version of this podcast is now available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and most of the others, or you can find it at futr.buzzsprout.com. Today, we're going to be talking about Sysdig. Sysdig was founded as an open source troubleshooting tool by Loris Degioanni in 2013. You may know Loris as the co-creator of the very popular open source network analyzer Wireshark and the container security tool Falco. While Sysdig began life as a troubleshooting tool, it has evolved into a security tool which has left them well positioned for this pandemic. Security has been a huge challenge as businesses are faced with remote workers and a much more distributed cloud-centric infrastructure. Sysdig is in a position to leverage the tools that they built to quickly expand their product to address some of today's big gaps in the market. Today, we're talking with Sysdig CRO Keegan Riley. Keegan has worked for a who's who of technology stalwarts, from EMC to HPE to Nimble. And I'm very excited to talk with Keegan and get the story of Sysdig's journey. Welcome, Keegan.
Thanks, Chris. Really happy to be here.
Awesome. It's great to have you. Really appreciate you coming on. So tell me a little bit about the Sysdig story, the founders and, what was the impetus for the creation of Sysdig and, what was going on there?
Yeah, happy to. So, maybe just a little bit about Sysdig and where we are today. We are a San Francisco-based startup that's really focused on helping our customers confidently run containers, Kubernetes, and cloud services. Our product is a SaaS-based platform that we call the Sysdig Secure DevOps Platform. We allow cloud teams to secure their build pipelines, detect and respond to runtime threats, continuously validate compliance, and monitor and troubleshoot their cloud infrastructure and services. It's a platform that's built on an open core foundation, leveraging both tools that we built, like Sysdig Inspect and Falco, as well as some other projects like Prometheus and Anchor. We are a SaaS-first company. We've got deep partnerships with all the major public hybrid cloud vendors, AWS, GCP, Microsoft, IBM, and Red Hat. We've raised about $200 million from tier one investors, including Excel, Bain, Insight Venture Partners, and Goldman Sachs. And we're a very geographically distributed organization, although it looks like I'm hanging out in the mountains. I actually am with you guys here in Chicago. We also have offices in Raleigh, Saragossa, Spain, Milan, Italy, Belgrade, London, and teams in all major cities across the world. So that's a little bit about the company and a little bit about the founder. So Loris Degioanni is our founder. He, prior to Sysdig, co-founded a company called Case Technologies, where they came up with the Wireshark technology, which is still today probably the world's foremost network protocol analyzer. Right.
Yeah, it's critical tool out there.
Yeah. It's funny. We always we tell our sales teams to somehow mention Wireshark in the first couple sentences of sales call, and 9 times out of 10, somebody in the room goes, "Oh man, Wireshark has saved my job before." And if that happens, we're 80% more likely to win the deal. So
I'll tell you. I mean, in my life, Wireshark saved my bacon a lot of times, and I got to imagine when you're walking in to talk security with people, security people know Wireshark.
Absolutely.
Well.
Yeah, no, so. Absolutely right. And it's a very cool story. In fact, you guys should chat with Loris on a future podcast, because his whole back.
Well, I remember it from Ethereal.
Yeah, exactly.
Back in the day.
Exactly. And Loris is he's from humble beginnings in northern Italy and kind of backed into this open source world. Ended up at UC Davis, and Ethereal came out of a company in Kansas City or something like that, and they I mean, it's a crazy entrepreneurial story and a huge success story. And ultimately, they sold that company to Riverbed in 2010, which was a nice outcome. Small, essentially bootstrap company, 30 people. And then after the acquisition, he spent a little time at Riverbed as a CTO there, and then took a year off to go, ski the Alps and do what you do when you make money off an acquisition like that.
Must be nice.
Yeah, exactly. And between runs, on the chairlift, he was thinking about, okay, great. Wireshark was a great sort of single source of truth for network packets. You would just plug in somewhere on a router. But the cloud was becoming, obviously a major shift in how people thought about computing. And so in a post-cloud world, there wasn't necessarily a physical port to plug into. So he thought about, where could I go for a single source of truth? He came back home to Davis and in his backyard created Sysdig Inspect, which is an open source Linux troubleshooting tool. It's got a really unique kernel level instrumentation. It sees every single system call in a Linux environment. And around that same time, containers kind of became a thing, right? I mean, they've technically been around forever, just C groups, but they started to become kind of a major kind of basis for cloud native application development, and Sysdig Inspect became a really powerful troubleshooting tool. So for the first couple of years, that's all it was. It was an open source project. He started raising some seed money and things like that. And then in 2015, he really commercialized the technology and went beyond troubleshooting and into monitoring and forensics. And Sysdig, the corporation as we know it today, became a thing. So that's kind of the early days of the company.
Well, so you guys, you kind of hit the market. And I think, before we kind of move past this point, I think it's interesting that the roots of your company are open source, because I think that's a really big deal. And it's a great way, it's an underappreciated way to really develop a product, right? And to develop an ecosystem and a user base just really organically. I don't know if you want to speak to, sort of the advantages you've seen from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny when I explain to my friends and family that are not in tech what open source means. I usually start with a joke like, well, basically it means that we try to get money for stuff that's free. We sell free software. And when they look at me with a confused look on their face, I explain it a little bit further and say, do you remember Microsoft Encarta? The encyclopedia that came on CDs and everything like that. And, most people that are anywhere younger than us kind of look at me quizzically and I'm like, do you know what Wikipedia is? Yeah, I know what Wikipedia is. I'm like, okay, so that's open source versus closed source, right? That's fundamentally how you think about open source. And, I think it's interesting because security is one of the last spaces of high tech that hasn't really embraced open source with vigor. And we're seeing that change pretty dramatically. And I think, part of the reason for it is, there's just a speed and agility of open source software development that you can't compete with. And I think at the same time, the threat vectors for technology companies as software becomes their revenue generating IP, you've got to stay out of the bad guys faster and faster and faster. And there's a saying that historically security companies don't have a real long shelf life, right? Because when you figure out a solution to threats, the attackers adapt and all of a sudden you become somewhat outdated. And so I think, the leveraging an open source foundation allows us to be much more agile, much more responsive, much faster. And also, it's sort of a more transparent way to build software, right? There's no vendor lock-in. We actually have customers that started with the commercial product and then moved to the open source projects and built their own wrapper around it. And we're cool with that. I mean, if that's better for their business and they have the expertise to do it, God bless.
Yeah, I think, the transparency piece is a really interesting one. And I think it's so important in the security space, because I think, there is that subset of people who, audit their code and build everything from source. And, I remember back in the early days with, some of the security guys who just had open BSD boxes everywhere. It's like totally unmanageable solution, but best of breed. I think, I think that gives, people with that sort of mindset a little bit of a level of comfort, right? Because not having opaque internals is tricky in the security business.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. And I think, part of this also sort of dovetails with kind of the platform shift that's happening as companies move to microservices architectures and Kubernetes and containers in the cloud, and away from sort of monolithic, four walls around their application infrastructure, because that essentially it forces you to rethink security, right? You simply cannot protect yourselves in the same way. You've got to sort of embrace this zero trust, completely new paradigm, and you've got to, again, be really, really fast with how you do these things. So if you've got to rethink it, why not rethink it in a way that is going to set you up for long-term success?
Yeah, I like the fact that you mentioned zero trust there. I think that's a really interesting up and coming security movement. And while we see a lot of people adopting certain pieces of it, we don't see too many customers out there today with that full stack of it. I think it's aspirational for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. to go down the zero trust road, but I think it's a good journey to start for a lot of companies, because when you talk about security in depth, it's a great way to enhance your security by starting to adopt some of those principles.
Yeah, no, absolutely right.
So all right, so tell me, you guys have this company, you've got great analytics, you're dealing with microservices, and you're providing a great solution around that. And then you're like, well, we've got all this stuff plugged in here. We can start taking a look at the security here. And you start developing out some of those tools. And then, a little while later, this pandemic hits. Everybody, scatters to the wind. You got everybody working from home. You've got all this infrastructure that was on-prem now is in the cloud and SaaS applications, and people rapidly moving to microservices and all this stuff. And it was like perfect place, perfect time, and it gave you guys a great opportunity to pivot in the direction of security, right? Could you tell me a little bit about what was going on there and the thinking there, and how that's been working out?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as much as I would love to claim that we saw this coming and 6 months ago, we made this hard pivot to something, which is, it can kind of seem that way from the outside, right? I've found in my background of doing startups that from the outside, things always seem like an overnight success, right? And what people don't see is the years of really grinding hard labor that go into it. And when it comes to security for us, I think it is sort of an intentional evolution of where we were going. Like we talked about before, we were
just go with we saw the future. And
exactly. We're just that smart and fast. No. So we were pretty focused on the observability space for the first couple of years, probably 2015 to 2017. And I joined the company in early 2017. And one of the things that attracted me to Sysdig was Falco, which is the open source project that we ultimately ended up donating to the CNCF, and has become the de facto standard for runtime rules engines in the open source world. And then Secure is the commercial product on top of that, which was launched in late 2017, early 2018. It really has been a mature product for about 12, 15 months now. So to your point, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good, right? This product came out at exactly the right time. And so we always had a really firm belief that this convergence of dev, sec, and ops was very real. And that, we had this saying that you can't secure what you can't see. And in a container and Kubernetes world, the ability to have deep visibility into that infrastructure was really going to lend itself well to the security security portion of the product. But I will say, I mean, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I remember in April of this year, we had some hard conversations as an executive team, right? Like, we don't know what's coming. We don't know how bad this is going to be. Are we going to be all right? Luckily, we had just closed a $70 million round of funding in January. So again, just pure luck on the timing, right?
There's somebody psychic at the company.
Yeah, exactly. It's we're very grateful for some of those things. And again, we can't, we worked hard to get lucky on some of these things, but we were still in a position where we were scratching our heads going, man, this is going to be tough, because it's, we spent the last 2.5, 3 years for me, and beyond that for Loris and everybody else, really working hard to build an early stage startup, and hadn't yet reached that point of real, downhill momentum. We're still pushing the snowball uphill, if you will. And then, around June, July, it started feeling a little easier in ways. We were getting deals done, and deals were becoming bigger, and so on and so forth. And then, in Q3, it was like, whoa, what is happening here? I mean, we had the biggest quarter we've ever had by a wide margin. And here we are in Q4, and we're already past where we were in Q3. And it is undoubtedly, I mean, people are just moving money into digital transformation, and they're moving money into cloud security and container security, because this is how you need to build your business to be resilient, not just in sort of a lockdown environment, but for the future. I don't think anything that's happening over the last 6 months wasn't already going to happen. It's just that we've accelerated, 5 years of digital transformation initiatives into 1 year.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's that old saying that, luck is really just opportunity and preparation, right? It's so, I mean, it sounds like you guys are taking care of it on that front. So, tell me a little bit about, what you guys, what was it in this, what was the big gap in the security world that you guys, saw that you could really make a difference in?
Yeah. So, the term we use is secure DevOps. That's sort of broadly what we say we do. And we define that as embedding security into the software development lifecycle. And that software development lifecycle is being completely reshaped by a couple things, a couple kind of broad sea changes. And these are sort of useful as foundation for how we think about this. The first really is software delivery, right? How applications are written in a modern world. It used to be the old waterfall approach, right? Which took a really long time. And it was back in the days when, V1 came out 1 year and V2 came out the next year, and so on and so forth. Yeah. And then it kind of shifted towards more of an agile delivery methodology. And now today, your cutting edge software firms are using a CI/CD deployment method where there is no version. I mean, the concept of a version 1 or a version 2 is completely irrelevant, because you've essentially broken the application up into, a bunch of little parts that all get continuously improved upon. So that delivery shift has been one kind of key fundamental change that we've seen. The second is the actual architecture of the applications, going from that sort of monolithic stack, right, where I've got my application on an Oracle database, on a Dell server, on Cisco routers, on EMC storage, or whatever your preferred stack is sitting in a data center, to today a microservices architecture in a hybrid cloud. Right, where everything is broken up, and some code might get written on a laptop in Starbucks, and some might get written in the office, and some might get written in India, and it all just gets ported up into AWS, and you don't really care about any interdependencies below. So that the architecture is fundamentally different, and then the containerization, which allows that architecture to be completely decentralized like that, away from VMs and into sort of an opaque, dynamic, almost ephemeral container environment, right? And so those three changes really have caused some major shifts, specifically as it relates to security. And there's three big things that we see in the market that we think we're addressing. One is, and this is quickly becoming one of those cliche buzzwords, but shift left, right? Embedding security earlier in the development lifecycle and integrating it in with build and CI/CD tools. That's the first major implication. The second is runtime context, right? So if you think about it, microservices really sort of destroy the traditional application perimeter. Like I talked about before, you can't put four walls around a microservices architecture. So you know, when you're thinking about applications that are composed dynamically as this mesh of containers and services, you have to think about a new application boundary. And to do that, you really have to understand deep Kubernetes context and cloud metadata, which we do really nicely. And then the third is forensics, and specifically container forensics. You know, that ephemeral nature of containers. I mean, we do a report every year on the state of the container space, and I think we found that the average lifetime of a container is like 2 minutes or something like that. It's not right, but it's directionally accurate. These things just spin up and spin down, and so that requires, you know, new instrumentation to capture and record the activity that goes on in a container environment. So these are sort of the, you know, it's a broad platform shift. And we believe that much like the physical to virtual platform shift that happened in the mid 2000s, this platform shift introduces a real opportunity to bring new tooling to bear.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's interesting. I was watching, now we're into the third week of AWS reInvent.
And I think they've just extended it indefinitely. It's just going to go on forever.
Good. I think reInvent, it's just never going to stop now. But the keynote speaker today was Werner Vogels, right? Who's always great to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of a madman, but it's awesome. But he talked about a concept of dependability versus availability, because we talk so much about availability of systems, but there's so much more to it, right? There's sort of, you know, the trustworthiness of the systems, there's the availability of the systems, there's sort of, you know, the maintainability of these systems in you know, security contexts and things like that. And I think, you know, you guys are putting forth a product that really kind of addresses that dependability thing, right? Not just necessarily the availability, but, you know, looking at a broader context of how everything's functioning within the environment, and is it available, you know, to be accessed, but is it secure, or is it, you know, is this something that a platform that can be trusted? You know, I think that's a really different take on it. That's really kind of important as we go forward. You know? Yeah,
I haven't seen the keynote yet, but I definitely want to watch it now. It sounds like an interesting concept, and it does kind of jive with how we're thinking about things.
Yeah. So you know, like we've talked about a lot about the security piece of it. Could you talk about kind of what you know, the bigger value prop is for Sysdig, and just, you know, around some of the analytics tools as well? Because I mean, obviously that's kind of where you got your start. So
yeah, definitely. So, you know, we kind of think about it as, you know, at a high level, what we're trying to do is, like I said, help people run Kubernetes containers and cloud services confidently. And part of that is the security element of it, right? But part of it is also the monitoring portion of it. So monitoring containers and Kubernetes and cloud services is also very, very challenging because they are opaque black boxes to legacy monitoring tools, right? So the ability to go in at the kernel layer and capture every system call and keep that information, it's sort of you know, we've got the haystack of what's happening in your environment. And so we can help you prevent issues. We can help you monitor performance and capacity. You have super granular data to do troubleshooting. So, you know, when something happens, you can go back and do forensics and understand, you know, what happened and how to prevent it in the future. And it's another sort of part of our open core DNA. You know, one of the beautiful things about open source projects is it tends to almost be a winner take all by use case, right? And so Prometheus has really emerged as the de facto standard of the monitoring world. In fact, you know, I know AWS made some announcements around things that they're doing with Grafana and some other kind of monitoring elements that are based on Prometheus. we love Prometheus, right? We embrace that as a standard, and we consider ourselves an enterprise backend for Prometheus at great scale. In fact, one of our really public partners and customers is IBM. IBM Cloud is probably one of the largest Prometheus deployments in the world. Sysdig is the monitoring backend for everything in IKS. So monitoring is, it's a huge part of how we think about the secure DevOps platform.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've seen is kind of a trend, because obviously, during the pandemic, everybody kind of shifted things sort of haphazardly and didn't really address many of the security concerns that were out there. But the other part of that is that everybody is really protective of their cash flow, right? Which is, I think, one of the reasons why it's great to have a SaaS service, because, sort of that OpEx kind of model plays better to businesses today that are, cash flow sensitive.
Yeah.
But I think what's really interesting is that people are trying to get more out of their tools these days, and I think having the ability to do both analytics and security analytics with one tool, and then, bring that back to sort of an aggregation tool that gives you a more, pervasive look over multiple aspects of your security stack, is really like the kind of model that people are shifting to.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, there's exactly zero large enterprise customers out there today saying, I wish I could have more vendors. I wish I could bring on more tooling and learn and more dashboards and things like that. So, the fact that we do provide this unified platform for security, compliance, monitoring, threat detection, incident response, so on and so forth, that spans truly the entire build, run, respond kind of components of cloud native application development, tends to be a really big advantage for us. And we've got customers that start with a security workload and then eventually embrace monitoring, and vice versa. We've got customers that started as really big monitoring customers and then added the security and compliance and threat detection functionality later.
Yeah. It's a interestingly complex world out there, and with so much disaggregation of everything, it is just really quite chaotic.
Yeah,
more so than any time, I think. And in the pace, like you were saying earlier, this wasn't a trend that didn't exist before, but the pandemic caused this massive acceleration into SaaS and the cloud and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting to see. I mean, some companies were very, very well prepared for this, and others, not so much. And it's when the change happens, violently, you tend to get exposed, right? And then you got to do things quickly.
Yeah. So Keegan, we've known you now for a while throughout your career, and it's awesome to have you here, man. You're a great leader, and you've done a good job of going to these startups and building out sales organizations, right? So, what is your like strategy? What's your key things about culture? As you're building out sales teams, what's your secret sauce?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that I think too few companies spend enough time thinking about. Because I find that it's something that, if you don't think about it, it doesn't happen by itself, right? And so the other thing that I'd say as a preface to the answer, I think there's in the Valley, there's almost a little bit of a backlash against saying, hiring for cultural fit and things like that. And I understand that, right? I think it's sometimes it's an easy term to get abused, where people mistake culture fit for, I hire people that look like me, that, want to drink beer with me, that root for the same teams, that like the same things and have the same interests and things like that. That's not culture fit, right? Culture fit is, as an organization, being very deliberate about saying, here are the values of the organization, and we need to ensure that the people that we hire align with those values. And at the same time, bring diversity of thought and diversity of background and things like that. And that is part of the culture, right? To value candor and debate and things like that. And so I think, at Sysdig, we've we've kept it pretty simple. We've decided on 3 core values for the company. The first one is love our customers. And I think that, you have to put that first, right? Because
Yes.
if you don't truly love your customers and invest in their success, especially in a subscription world, right? I mean, the days of being able to pull off a 7-figure PO and then disappear, long gone. You've got to re-earn your customers' trust every day. And so, loving our customers is really core to how we think about what we do at the company. And so I think from a hiring perspective, you've got to find people that have empathy, that have, a true desire to make customers successful. The second thing that we talk about as a core value is trust in the team. Because you have to, when you're scaling a company in that 0 to 10 phase, you can rely on a couple heroes, right? You can have those 3 or 4, men or women that can just, and you don't know how they do it, but it's, fourth quarter, 2 seconds left on the clock, and they throw up a Hail Mary and it lands. And you can get from 0 to 10 that way. But you can't get from 10 to 100 that way. From 10 to 100, you've got to build a scalable organization where people know what their job is, and can do it well, and don't have to worry about, is my friend over here going to do their job? And so trust in the team is all about building a place where when you look to your left and you look to your right, you're like, man, I better be on my A game today because these folks are good and I trust them and I don't want to let them down and I want to get better. And so that's sort of the second thing that we think about. And then the third, which is my personal favorite and is probably what I look for most in candidates that are looking to join our team, is something that we call dig deeper. Sysdig, dig deeper. It's a little cheesy, but it's
cheesy's okay.
Yeah, exactly. It really, the quality that we're talking about when we say dig deeper is grit. And grit, I think there's a great book, if you've not read it, by Angela Duckworth, who's at the University of Pennsylvania. And she has basically devoted her life to studying what makes people successful. And in that book, she defines grit as the combination of passion and perseverance. So the ability to really, really find joy in what you're doing, and do it for reasons that are sort of, related to your ultimate goal in life. Why do you want to build great companies? I don't know. It's just what I want to do. I just decided that I wanted to do it one day. It's, a high level goal of mine. Right. And then the ability to persevere over long periods of time. Right. So the ability to say, and this is super important in the context of a startup, because you get a lot of doors slammed in your face. You hear a lot of no. The logo on your business card means nothing in a startup context. Right. And you have to have the ability to see I recognize what we're trying to build, and years out, I see what this could be. And I am going to maniacally chase this without fail. I mean, it doesn't mean you don't have bad days. Everybody has bad days, but sure. If you give me somebody who's going to work hard every single day and get a little better every single day, and who will not be denied their ultimate goals, I'll go to war with that person 7 days a week and twice on Sundays. So that's sort of the biggest thing that we look for in our sales teams.
Well, you said two things there, which I think we have seen systemically helping startups build great companies. Is one, you said you're going to focus on the customer, and every time we hear that, right, from a startup, that as soon you have an early adopter, you provide them the appropriate service and support, and it's not just the sale is done and you leave. You make sure that they're okay. You make sure they have access to your engineering, that they know about the latest updates that are coming out there. Maybe they can become beta for the next release and things like that, right? So just nothing matters more than what the customer thinks, right? Like, we can think it's a great idea, but if no one's going to buy it, well, then, that's a problem. And the second thing is the investment of just like the people, right? And because people, technology is technology, but people build organizations. And when you have that culture thing going, I feel like it's an unfair advantage that you have now, because now you got however many people you have, and they're coming in every day like, I love being here. You know, I like Keegan. I like my team. I like where we're going. I like our leadership. You know, it's so hard to find these days. And I see what you and Suresh and the rest of the team have been able to build there. So congratulations on just all of that.
Yeah, thanks. Really appreciate that.
And the other question that I would have for you, Keegan, is because you are such a stud in the biz, given your experiences.
You can't even say that with a straight face.
I just kind of no, you know it's true. You know it's true. But honestly, you know, you and I have always talked about just, you know, we've all gotten here to this point somehow. You know, like there's people that have helped us along the way in our careers, you know, and I'm always looking for people that just good guidance, you know, something that I can learn from, you know. So what's something that you could share with, you know, people that are, you know, younger people that are trying to make it in the IT sales world, you know?
That's a great question. It's a great question. And I think, you know, I mean, it's you always think about, you know, when you were in that position trying to sort of, you know, make a career of things, you know, for me, that was pretty recently. For you, it was, you know, back in the punch card era. Just kidding.
Right.
I mean, I think the first bit of advice that I would give is, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help. I feel like I was always pretty intimidated when I was early in my career, right? And you always had that sort of imposter syndrome where it's like, I can't go talk to that person and ask that question and things like that, you know. And then one day you realize, like, oh man, I'm the guy with the gray hair that people are wanting to ask the questions of. I don't know when that happened, but I'm happy to help, because all of a sudden like, you know, I'm still learning. I think it's important to have a growth mindset. And so I don't have all the answers, but I've got more answers than I did 10 years ago. And I'm happy to share that information with people that are, you know, where I was 10 years ago. So I think, you know, don't be afraid to seek out good mentors, and don't be afraid to take risks on jobs where you're going because you have faith in the people that you're working for and things like that. And, you know, I mean, it's great to spend some time at a big company with a beautiful logo on the business card and things like that. There's a ton to be learned at companies like that. But, you know, take a flyer when you're young. Go try to chase the stars and work for a startup and things like that.
Yeah, right. You know, that's a great point, because, you know, just even working with Chris and I, he's one of my mentors. But what I like about Chris and I is we don't always agree, you know, and sometimes the best advice is with someone that doesn't agree with you, you know, and to seek out those people even more, you know, like what am I missing?
Yeah,
maybe?
No, I think that's a really, really important point. And I think I think one of the ways we originally connected, you know, you did a lot of work with NetApp back in the day. And my boss now, Suresh, was an executive at NetApp. I think that's kind of how we first connected. But the reason I think of that is because, you know, when I joined Nimble Storage back in the early days, one of the things that I noticed immediately about Suresh and about the culture at that company, which we tried to emulate here, I've always tried to emulate in every context that I've been in. Again, I think there's even a book called Radical Candor. It's a little bit of a buzzword and kind of a trend in organizational behavior. But it's so important. And I think, you know, when you have that growth mindset, when you're trying to improve and get better and make a career for yourself, you know, if people aren't telling you the truth about what's working and what's not working, then, you know, how do you improve? Right. And so working with people that have the fortitude to tell you the truth, even when the truth is hard to deliver, is really, really critical. And it can sting at times. Right. I mean, I've had moments with my boss, Suresh, when I'm like, ooh, ouch.
Yeah,
that is,
I know
that is tough feedback, but you're not wrong on these two things. On this thing, I think you are wrong, and I'm going to argue it and debate it, and we're going to have a healthy back and forth on this. And ultimately, you know, even if we disagree, we'll align and walk out of the room, and you know, we'll be well aligned. But at least we've had the debate, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's the process that's important, right? I mean, I think, you know, having been an executive at, you know, several companies, you just don't get good information a lot of the time. And it's hard to find those people who are going to tell you like it is.
Yeah.
And it's so valuable when they do.
And that's why I've hung up with you multiple times too, Chris. There's been times where like I'm literally like, Chris, I can't handle this anymore. He's like, just one last point. Like, no, I gotta go. I just have to get off this call right now because I'm gonna go nuts, and I just have to cool off. That's when I know that there's something.
It's like you realize, when you're wrestling with a pig in mud, the pig likes it. Very, very abbreviated version of that story, but
I'm not sure who's the pig in that analogy.
I'll let your audience ascertain who I'm talking about there.
Yeah, Keegan, tell me what's next for Sysdig. Where are you guys going next? What's the next great big thing?
Yeah, it's great.
You tell me all your secrets.
Yeah, well, let's have all your listeners sign an NDA and let me pull up a PowerPoint and go over our roadmap. And so I mean, at a high level, for the past couple of years, we've really been focused on large enterprise, right? If you go to our website, you can read the case studies for companies like SAP Concur and Goldman Sachs. And Goldman is monitoring and securing over 100,000 nodes and 1 million cores. Wow. And they use us for, everything from troubleshooting and monitoring to EDR and forensics for Linux containers and so on and so forth. And that's awesome. I mean, that's, we really have a great foundation of very large enterprise customers. So, the reason I bring that up is because what we're working on now, I mean, it was appropriate to go after those folks a couple of years ago because they were bleeding edge early adopters when it came to containers and Kubernetes. And we can solve problems at scale that no one else can. So it was just the right place to go with the product out of the gates. Now, as the Kubernetes and container market is maturing, you're starting to see it become a little bit more mainstream, and you're seeing a lot of mid-market companies that are really embracing cloud native and microservices. And so a lot of the work that we've done over the past year is to simplify the product. And so we released a SaaS Essentials version of the product, which is really just the key workflows that mid-market companies will need. It doesn't require a PhD in Kubernetes to actually implement the solution. So a big push into the mid-market, a big push into self-service in the SMB and mid-market space. You'll start seeing some freemium options from us. You'll start seeing a little bit more of a modular approach to how we sell the product. If you only need, image scanning, for example, or if you don't care about image scanning and you just need, runtime threat detection, we're going to make it easier to consume the product. And again, that goes back to the love the customer value, right? Technology always moves towards ease of use and simplification. So we're going to make the product easier to consume. The second thing is from a security perspective, we're sort of dominating the container security space, and we're the biggest company, in terms of revenue in the market, and we're increasing that lead every quarter. But we're starting to develop some features that are bringing us into more of a general cloud security space, if you will. So like the announcement we made around AWS CloudTrail a few months ago. CloudTrail, for people that are not familiar, it's an AWS service that enables governance, compliance, auditing, and both operational and risk auditing in an AWS account. So you can log, monitor, and retain this account activity. And that's great, but now you've got this huge bucket of CloudTrail logs. What we've done in our announcement of Sysdig Cloud Connector is give folks the ability to analyze every CloudTrail in real time. So think about it as applying Falco, the rules engine that's beautiful in Kubernetes, to AWS CloudTrail, and which gives you a ton of flexibility in an AWS environment. So, but it brings us sort of outside of containers and more into general cloud security. And so a lot of the things on the roadmap are sort of stepping on the accelerator around that. You'll see things around CSPM and so on and so forth. And beyond that, I'll get in trouble with Colleen and my legal department if I share too much detail. But not too far down the road.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Sounds like you guys have a lot of plans in the future. So it's great to hear.
The other thing I'll say about it is this is where being an open source company it gives us a massive advantage, right? Because we don't have to hire thousands of engineers to build the underlying engines for some of these things. There's all kinds of really interesting open source tools out there that, some companies will use and build around on their own. Like, if anybody attended, KubeCon a couple months ago, Shopify was on stage talking about how they use Falco for threat detection on a massive scale. They don't pass a dime, but they use Falco, right? And so there's some companies like them that'll be able to do that, but the vast majority of companies don't want to be in that business. It's not their core business. They don't want to build a wrap around it, and they don't want to support it. And so when we embrace these open source technologies and make them a part of our platform, the platform becomes better and more powerful really quickly.
So Keegan, sounds awesome. Sysdig sounds like you've got a lot of great plans for the future. Sounds like you're having a great year, considering, most people aren't. So congratulations on that. And really appreciate you coming on and telling us the story.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Sometimes I feel a little guilty about that. I don't like to sound like it's been a spectacular year, because it's been a very challenging year on a number of fronts for all of us and for everybody out there. And all I can say is we've all dug deeper, and it looks like we're at the beginning of the end with all these vaccines and whatnot, and can't wait to get together with you guys in person again someday soon.
Yeah, that'll be great. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yep.
Thanks for everything.
Thanks for the time, guys. Really appreciate it.
And if you like what you saw, please click that like button. Hit the subscribe button, because that helps a ton. And if you want to get notifications when we post new content, click on that bell icon. And we'll see you in the next video.